guys. It's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Kevin Parthenay to LABMUNDO today, and also this event is organized by the Jean Monnet Chair, represented here by Professor Ana Paula. So the event is part of the project Autonomia and Multilateral Reconfigurations, European Union, Latin American Relations, AURELA, which is coordinated by Kevin and also our colleague Rafael Mesquita in the Federal University of Pernambuco, through the CAPES COFECUB program. So Professor Parthenay is full professor of political science at the University of Tours, junior fellow of the Instituto Universitaire de France, and research associate at both the United Nations University and Sciences Po. He is currently the principal investigator of Reg Paul Walla research program, which is a program funded by the French National Research Agency. His research focuses on comparative regionalism, Latin America's place in global multilateralism, the foreign policies of Latin American states, and democracy in Central America. The results of this research have appeared in leading international journals, including International Affairs, Global Studies Quarterly, Review of International Studies, Journal of European Integration, Foro International, and Revue Internationale de Politique Comparée. Pardon my French.
No, it's perfect.
Among his major publications are A Political Sociology of Regionalisms, published by Paul Macmillan in 2019, Crisis in Latin America, Les démocraties des racines, et Politique de l'Amérique latine, co-authored with Frédéric
Luo. Yeah.
Thanks. He also taught at numerous universities across Latin America. So today, Professor Parthenay will speak on Latin America and the contemporary world order. This topic is particularly relevant to the collective research agenda that we are currently developing here at LABMUNDO on the crisis of multilateralism. We are going to organize a collection that will be published the next year. So we are especially interested and excited to hear from you, Professor, and your reflections are going to be important for us to engage in this discussion afterwards. So, Professor, thank you again for being here with us in Rio. It's a pleasure, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pablo. Well, it's my pleasure actually to be here in Rio, to have this visit. I was in Recife last week with my colleague Rafael Mesquita, you mentioned, for this project. So this mission is directly linked to this project, but it's also a pleasure to today to present maybe more the result of a research that is almost terminated, actually. I have still one year to end this project. So thank you very much for having me today here at UERJ. Thank you, Carlos, because the very origin of my presence is also linked to the meeting we had in France with Carlos actually some years ago already. So thanks Carlos for this. Actually, as you said, this project is kind of different regarding the EU-LAC relation that we are going to explore within this CAPES COFECUB, but it could be interesting because it covers a broader issue related to Latin America and contemporary world ordering, in which, and through that I've been collecting and producing in this project, it could be useful to explore more precisely EU-Latin American relation in this shape, regarding specifically three policy domains that are the main architecture of this project. So, at the outset, I always like to start this presentation on this project with an historical anecdote. That goes back to the 1944 precisely. It was during the negotiation of the Bretton Woods conference in summer 1944. This conference was aiming at forging and shaping a new international economic order in the aftermath of the Second World War. And Well, in this conference, nearly all the eyes were riveted to intellectual battle, intellectual duel between two main figures, White and Keynes, of course, the two representatives, the first one of the United States and the second one of the UK. So the whole conference was kind of understood as an intellectual battle between those two guys, White and Keynes. And a very consequence of this is one reflection by a member of the official delegation from the UK, a member of the British Treasury, that wrote in a letter to one colleague that, and you can see, and I quote, "It was silly to make the pretense that the Mexicans and the Brazilians would discuss at the expert level a document which the American Treasury was endorsing. They were there," he argued, and I finished, "to sign," and it's the worst part, "to sign in the place of the signature, nothing more." That's kind of brutal. And this is very interesting because such paternalistic and condescending attitude were, at the time, quite common. Actually, it was kind of the standard, the main standard. And this epitomized the long-standing relegation of Latin American countries and Latin America as a continent within international relations, a marginalization that was already empirically misguided. And this is one of the main points I want to make and put ahead. For reasons of time, I shall not review here the extensive record of domination, humiliation, and exclusion of this kind that feed all the history, multilateral history of Latin American states. But instead, I wish to focus on the idea that this systematic relegation has produced a lasting legacy. That legacy remains visible today, even within the academic analysis of international relations. Analysis that portray the continent and its states as peripheral actors, assuming a passive status in world affairs, enduring the notion of irrelevance. So maybe you have in mind, and maybe you know these good colleagues of mine that I appreciate a lot, but in my perception I've made a misguided diagnosis of the situation. In this highly schematic fashion, Andrés Malamud and Luis Schenoni, very appreciated colleagues again, argued in 2021 that Latin America has become increasingly irrelevant. Maybe you remember that in that article. Their argument rested solely upon realistic and realist material dimension of power. So economic strength, military, not yet. Military projection and institutional weight. So different perspective to assess how a state has power or can be active or agent in the international scene or sphere. This argument is mainly problematic because it overlooks the day-to-day practices of international relations. And this day-to-day practice refers to normative influence, the capacity, the way to produce, to shape norms that constrain behavior at the international level. It overlooks soft power, of course, and it overlooks the capacity to shape international behavior. So, despite this very dominant discourse and the standard narrative of marginalization and its contemporary echoes, many colleagues have demonstrated over years and over past decade mainly that even while occupying a secondary or peripheral status, and despite being composed largely of what we are calling small states, Latin American countries decisively influenced the formation of the international order, both in the 19th century and the 20th century. So behind me, you'll find different kind of these works and different colleagues that have been concretely participating to this very important debate. One of the very first insight in that regard is this book from Eric Eiliner in 29, if I remember well, on the forgotten foundation of Bretton Woods Conference. And we'll we have seen after this first step different works that have been produced by other colleagues. For instance, Arnulf Becker-Lorca, Yannick Verly, Christy Thornton, Juan Pablo Scarfi, Carsten Schulz, Tom Long, etc., etc., etc. So now we have a different perspective and vision of how Latin American states have been participating in the construction of the international order, both in the 18th century and the 20th century. To put it just with some instances, they have been participating a lot on specific norms, but that are deeply important to think and for the practice of the daily international relations. For instance, sovereign equality. For instance, non-intervention. That is quite important when we are thinking today about some very high intensity conflict, such as Ukraine war against Russia, or Gaza, Israel, or the unilateral intervention of the US in Venezuela, or the probability to do so in Cuba, etc., etc. Non-intervention is a norm that has been shaped during the 19th century by Latin American countries. So this has to be recalled. But we have plenty of norms like this that have been constraining the way to behave in the international order, multilateral inclusivity, of course, developmentalism, etc., etc. So other more specific international normative contribution include the promotion, for instance, of public development loans, the delimitation of marine spaces, the famous 200 nautical miles, the principle of the common heritage of humankind, that it's again commonly forgotten, but in the research I've been doing on the space sector, I discovered that it's actually not an impulse from Arvid Prado. We used to know that this principle of common heritage of mankind come from a Maltese delegate at the UN, Arvid Prado, in 77, sorry. But actually, this very notion, very important notion today, can be traced back to a specific negotiation on space treaties and to a Latin American diplomat, an Argentinian diplomat, Armando Coca, as early as 59. So almost 10 years earlier than what we say as the original and genesis of the concept. So building on these historical studies, political science, international relations, and international political economy scholarship has sought to assess the role of Latin American states in global affairs, particularly during the second half of the 20th century. And this gives rise to a paradox, because even as scholarly evidence increasingly, I'm sorry if it's a bit, it appears a bit small, but I think you can read it. Even as scholarly evidence increasingly demonstrate that the region has been central in shaping what we call the liberal international order, the mainstream discourse of absence, passivity, and irrelevance remains pervasive. So it's kind of a very interesting paradox, because we have plenty of scholarship that demonstrates concretely that America played an important role to define international order. So we know, we have data, we have explanation, but at the same time, this mainstream discourse remains highly pervasive. So we still define the continent and Latin American countries as still peripheral or marginalized in the way of conducting international relations. So this is kind of puzzling, very highly puzzling paradox. So this observation brings us to the central question of my current and almost ending project, LATGlobe. And the question is, to what extent do the analytical frameworks and intellectual illusions of the 20th century, marginalization, persist into the 20th century, 21st century? The opening decades of this century have been characterized by a profound reconfiguration of international order. marked by intensified great power rivalry, high intensity wars. I mentioned Ukraine, I mentioned Israel, Gaza, the intervention of the US, and also it has set the renewed prioritization of strategic resources, critical minerals, etc., etc. So once again, when facing those kind of issues, we see that there is a prevailing narrative that privileges force and material power, again, leaving Latin America aside, again, from any debate related to international relation. The basic instance is to know how absent they are in the debates related to how to make peace in Israel-Gaza war, or how to create incentive toward peace or intervening in mediation capacities related to the war in Ukraine and Russia. So it's again kind of puzzling to see how they are absent, despite knowing that they are very active and influential in the international relations. So what we see is kind of a repetition of history. The same dynamic as we have been seeing in the 19th century and the 20th century. So my argument is as follows. Despite being silenced, Latin America remains highly active in the production of international norms. What precisely reveals something kind of interesting, the disjunction between norms and power in our understanding of international relations. And it contributes as well decisively to the structuring of new international grammar and the shaping of emerging world order. So in this regard, Latin America and its states distinguish themselves by adopting what I conceptualize as a strategy of international norm-fare. So let me begin with just a quick clarification concerning international norms. As you know, as good students of international relations, norms do not emerge as ex nihilo, from nothing. They generally follow kind of lengthy processes of gestation before being crystallized in written form within, for instance, international agreements, treaties, conventions, etc., etc. So they embody what we know, referring to this famous definition by Finmore and Sicking, as the standards of appropriate behaviors, how to behave properly in the international scene. This is the famous definition by Finmore and Sicking, 1891. So, in other words, it refers to the shared expectations regarding conduct in world politics. So the norms examined here in this project are enshrined in specific articles, chapters of international agreements as outcomes of arduous negotiations. So thus, in this regard, norm-making constitute an important, and in my project, norm-making constitute an important indicator of the international influence a state may have, which is why it is essential to analyze multilateral processes that lead to such agreements. So, as you can understand, my reflection is not based at all on materiality of power, nor economic strength, nor military capabilities, projection, etc. But I'm trying to figure out and assess international influence through this capacity of producing norms and constraining the behavior of others through this. So this notion of international norm-fare is, as you may understand, quite inspired by another one, lawfare, of course. But in my regard, international norm-fare is broader in scope and not necessarily tied to legalization. So it is more centrally concerned with, for instance, agenda setting, framing international issues, so framing theory, and norm setting, so encompassing but not limited to legal norms. International norm-fare does not ever only refer to the instrumental deployment of legal arguments for political purpose. I referred precisely, and you have the definition of it behind me, as the diplomatic battles and strategies used to craft international norms that are constitutive of the world, of the new world order. This is the conception and the understanding of international norm here. So it can encompass very different strategies, actually, and you'll find all these strategies in the literature, but mainly scattered. Norm entrepreneurship, norm shaping, norm resistance, norm contestation, norm shaking, etc., etc., etc. I gather all this in this conception of international normfare in order to better assess this influence through norm making. So the argument derives mainly from empirical explanation. I'm not an hypothetical deductivist, but mainly an inductivist, as a good French political sociologist. And I've been working at the very beginning of this project on mainly qualitative material, but I evolved and I became a bit a quantitativist at the end. So I explain it in a few minutes. So all the reflection after this theoretical moment is based on 3 specific case studies of multilateral negotiations in areas very diverse, as you can see: outer space security, pandemic prevention, and ocean. So not necessarily ocean, but marine biodiversity. So you can see that every policy domain is linked to a specific multilateral negotiation. 2 of them have led to a formal, legally binding international agreement. For ocean, it's the BBNJ agreement. So the acronym refers to put it simply, marine biodiversity in area beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas mainly. Global health, it's related to the pandemic agreement. That is still ongoing. It's a bit tricky because we have a specific annex for a very specific aspect of the treaty that is still ongoing, but I put it in parentheses. And space security, it's kind of different because it's still ongoing. We are not in exactly the same shape of multilateral negotiation because it's more kind of open and soft multilateral discussion related to space security, but not specific negotiation of a legally binding international agreement. So why those policy domains? First of all, from the governance of the oceans to global health and space security, a wide range of issues currently threaten global stability and underscore the need for international norms. I've been interested in ocean, for instance, because of the induced effects of climate change that have underscored the vulnerability of oceanic spaces and already highlighted the potential impact on human societies. If we refer to rising temperature, ocean acidification, all these dimensions have devastating consequences on human societies, on marine biodiversity, first of all, which in turn threaten macro-level ecosystemic equilibria, as well as, of course, the survival of human communities as such. Yet, what is interesting is to see that oceans, particularly areas beyond national jurisdiction, those areas remain mainly unregulated. We have no rule, no norm. It's mare liberum in Latin. So it's free space, and you can do whatever you want. If you have power, if you have capabilities, you can exploit, extract, you can do whatever you want. So this precise reality creates, of course, asymmetries between countries, but it creates a kind of problem because in the high seas, you can access what is called common human resources that need to be shared to everybody because they have been produced in thousands of years and it can produce wealth and they have to be shared and not captured by only the most powerful state. So considering or studying these marine biodiversity issues in high seas refers to what is concretely presented as global ecosystemic disequilibria and how we can or we are supposed to regulate it or to intervene in this. In the same token, the COVID-19 pandemic, well, we all know that, has tragically reaffirmed the centrality of health in our societies, but mainly lacunas or difficulties in terms of global health governance. The logic of cooperation, the logics of solidarity were severely tested, and this has brought to the fore the necessity of rethinking the overarching frameworks, mechanisms, and vectors through which we can control and prevent future pandemic. Because if there is one thing we know is that we will face new pandemic. This is a certainty even at the scientific level. The question is when, and the question is how are we going to be better prepared to face it. So this is purposefully the idea that lead to the negotiation under the WHO umbrella to the negotiation of a pandemic treaty, actually. And finally, the third sector, not yet. The accelerating pace for space, the accelerating pace of technological progress reminds us daily that what occurs in outer space, so beyond our head, is not actually but remote, because it is intimately connected to our daily lives. What happened in outer space affects our capacity to communicate, of course. Without satellites, if we have a war in outer space, we can say goodbye to any kind of communications. But it's not only about our smartphone and communication, it's also the capacity to bring medical care to people. It's about the capacity to travel and many more aspects in our contemporary societies. So the contemporary use and uses of outer space, particularly given the vast asymmetries among the actors involved. Just see what happened a few days ago with Elon Musk, the first world trillionaire in history with the SpaceX that entered in stock market. This global asymmetry in a sector that is useful to all of us demand a reassessment of the practices and behaviors that unfold therein. So these are kind of strategical policy domains. So these three domains exemplify challenges whose effects extend well beyond the artificial boundaries of state sovereignty and affect humanity as a whole, and considered as a common concern, actually. So in that regard, for those issues and purposes that have common concern, international norms pertaining to the management of the common concern articulates well new aspiration in terms of international conduct and embody new ways of conceiving the contemporary world order. This is why the exploration of these three cases are not only fascinating, but are good platform of observation to see how what are called secondary states, Latin American states, contribute to the shaping of a new world order, a new grammar for the international order. So as two of these three cases have already led to final agreements, BBNG and pandemic agreement, I shall briefly focus on two ones, so BBNG and pandemic agreements. BBNG. the constitution, the building of the Regional Ad Hoc Coalition, a group that is called CLAM, for core Latin American members. I just put, but it's just right behind me. We have a specific article that has been recently published with two Brazilian colleagues actually on CLAM, Karina Oliveira and Ana Flavia Platos Barro. I'm sure you know. So we have been publishing this article in Marine Policy as an output of the negotiation actually of the BNG. And so this has been one of the main strategies to build a regional bloc in order to be better equipped to have greater influence within the negotiation. And a second recurrent and strong strategy has been norm entrepreneurship. Through the prolific submission of written proposals to shape the normative debate, placing CLAM as the second most active contributor after the European Union in this negotiation. So this is kind of interesting to see, again, how Latin American states can have power in the sense of norm in a negotiation. It's not based on material power, it's not based on the number of delegates you'll have behind the official table to assess at the expert level, the long list of official delegates for one country, but the capacity to propose written elements, amendments, reforms, add to the text in order to shape the text itself. So in that regard, the CLAM, the Core Latin American Member Group, directly contributed to the adoption and institutionalization of multilateral norms and rules through the BBNG agreement. This group has defended general principles, such as, for instance, common heritage of humankind and equity. Equity has been one of the main issues they have been defending. Why? Because it was the main way and solution to equalize the benefits that could be extracted from the use of the high seas or deep seabed and not being exploited in the generation to come. So they have bet a lot on this general principle of equity that have been deployed in many specific areas, for instance, capacity building, technology transfer, marine protected areas, in order to say, okay, we have not the technology right now, we are not the most powerful state that can exploit the high seas right now, and maybe never, but we are going to shape a legally binding international agreement that can prevent the strengthening of asymmetries, that this gap extend beyond in the future and affect the future generation. So this is very interesting because Latin American states use legally binding agreements in order to prevent the future, the bad consequences that could happen, and the extension of the deepening of asymmetries in that policy domain. So common heritage of mankind and equity in different aspects: marine genetic resources, capacity building, and marine technology transfer. Just a quick word on another output we have been producing with Rafael Mesquita, colleague from Universidad Federal do Pernambuco, from Seas to Ocean, assessing the Latin American states' contribution toward a regime complexification. It is not just a mention on this article because it's not directly related to the project, but it's kind of an extension of it, as we try to figure out how this influence that I've been exploring on one single cases can be traced back to a longer period of time, and maybe to UNCLOS 1, the first negotiation on oceans or seas. And what we see is that this influence we are attesting right now in the case of the BBNG is actually an influence that is much longer and that can be traced back to the early 50s, sorry, the early 50s. And this contributes to what we call regime complexification. This complex idea of trying to codify the regulation of the law of the sea, and trying to codify 2 or 3 decades later a new kind of agenda related to the seas that mix this one to environmental issues. So this is the debate on biodiversity applied to seas and high seas, and how, again, Latin American states have been influential in codification. So this is the idea of this treaty. And in this article, we use Rafael material on UN resolution in order to track this process. And we apply also a qualitative method. As I said earlier, we mix qualitative with quantitative aspect.
So he's responsible for you being a contacted.
It helped. Yeah, actually, it has been very helpful to become to evolve. But that's true. Yeah. Let's now shift to the pandemic agreements. I'm going to give more data on this, because this is the most advanced chapter of the forthcoming book with Oxford University Press on this project, actually, on pandemic agreements. So these are consolidated data on this, and this is quantitative part. It's very simple here, but it's more quantitative part. So again, related to the pandemic agreement, we have seen different kind of strategies. Interestingly, in this case, we have no Latin American coalition. For many reasons, I don't have time to expose here, but we have no Latin American coalition as such that have been formed. But we have a strong and self-consolidating cohesion and convergence of position among regions, nations that have been useful in order to influence the negotiation. First, we have a leadership core of countries that have emerged in this negotiation. A leadership core primarily driven by Brazil. In a second tier, Colombia and Argentina, and Mexico, but on a very specific topic. Together, these countries have been particularly active in shaping the draft text of the agreement. They have consistently put forward new proposals and alternative formulation, often advocating for stronger language and pressing for the inclusion of binding provisions. They are all the time inclined to codify, not accepting this idea of, okay, we'll see. Let's just assess soft norms or guidelines or practices. No, Latin American countries know that they can be affected by asymmetries. So they rely on very binding rules that can protect them for the generation to come. So here you can see the degree of activity, mainly by Brazil. Here, these are the different, intervention in the negotiated text. How they suggest alternative form, how they comment, how they suggest deletion in the text, move, reservation, retain. And what we can see here is that Brazil is one of the most contributor in the text as addings and delatings. So obviously the deletion was mostly oriented toward the proposition by the US, Japan, the European Union, that kind of try to set rules that could be asymmetrical for developing countries. So they decided to delete them and to propose new norms or new formulation of articles, chapters, etc., etc.
So, what's the time frame of
this negotiation? The time frame is 3 years of negotiation. basically, from 2022 to 2025. And there is an extension to the date in Geneva because there is one aspect related to Article 12. It's pathogens and benefit sharing article, PABs, what do you call PABs. They are still negotiating it because in this article lies the most tricky issues related to, okay, we are going to share our technology, we are going to share the benefits of producing vaccines, etc. So it's highly strategic in economical terms, of course. So they decided at the end to extend the negotiation and to negotiate on an annex related to PABs. So that's why it's still ongoing. So we see then Brazil very active, but on very specific aspects, for instance, on transfer technology, on research and development. We see that the leadership has been exerted by Mexico, a very leader in that regard, and Argentina and Colombia very active and leader on the issue of intellectual property related to technology transfer as well. The mixed issue in this negotiation. What do we have here? Yeah, again, a very quantitative appreciation of the intervention of Latin American states, among others, of course. But we can see Brazil, we can see Colombia, that are two very active states among other in the negotiation. And this graph precisely is an output of the network analysis produced on the basis of this data produced in the project that explore how coalition have been shaped in very specific issues. So, for instance, here we have an isolated part of the data produced related to technology transfer. So a specific article negotiated. Technology transfer refers to Article 11 of the negotiation. So only on the negotiation of Article 11, I have extracted the data of intervention and see how states were converging, diverging, and how broader coalition were shaped during the negotiation. And this is the kind of network that is produced. We have global north states or developed states that are kind of forming a specific coalition, promoting ideas that refers to we disagree with a free technology transfer, we disagree with free and extensive benefit sharing, those kind of asymmetrical kind of practices. And in the opposite, we have a global south coalition, but in contrast, try to make the most of this sharing, technology transfer, in order to not be impacted too much by this. And what is interesting in this regard is that Latin American countries are commonly known to be bridge builders. In many different international aspects, they are known to be bridge builders between developed countries and developing countries, between global north and global south. What is interesting in that negotiation, and in a way it is also present in the BBNG negotiation, is that they are no more betting on this bridge building strategy, but they are trying to consolidate global south coalition in order to be stronger in their provisions to foster equity again. And when I'm saying fostering equity in that regard is trying to have specific legally binding provisions that that incite or invite insight to this technology transfer and to this benefit sharing. So to put it very simply, for instance, when you have a firm that produces a vaccine, a measure of equity would be, okay, as for instance, we have given the very genesis, the original pathogen that served to produce the vaccine. When the vaccine is produced, you are going to give us for free 10% of the world production. So basically you are going to receive a lot of vaccines for the population. And also you may have a percentage in terms of selling of the vaccine, so it has economical also insights and benefits. These are equity measures that refers to technology transfer. So the interesting finding in this is that Latin America shift from bridge building strategy to consolidating equity position with Global South. And in that regard, they have shaped different kind of coalitions. So as I said, not Latin American coalition, but groups that mix Global South regions together, Africa, South Asia, etc., in a group that have been called in this negotiation the Group of Equity. And another group later on, at the very end of the negotiation, that was called Cross-Regional Group, whose purpose was to strengthen the provisions regarding equity as well. So this is the interesting part. And as we are here in Brazil, I can't not end this word on the pandemic agreement referring to the role of Brazil at the very end of the negotiation, because they played a pivotal treaty maker role. Because in the final hours, final marathon hours of the negotiation, we were, I say we, but they were in a deadlock concerning how to end the treaty. The deadlock was referring to technology transfer, and Brazil and the Brazilian delegate, Jean Monnet in Geneva, proposed a provision, a consensual provision that shifts the concern from technology transfer and voluntary technology transfer to what we could refer as mutually agreed terms related to technology transfer. It's highly technical, but this shifting in terms of concept and technical issue helped finding the final consensus. And if we now have a treaty, it's not due, but it's because and thanks to this very personal contribution that Jean made in the negotiation. Obviously, it has been validated by the permanent representative in the delegation and then negotiated with some allies in the negotiation, but this helped very, very deeply to find the final agreement of a negotiation. Just a quick word referring to outer space security. I'm on it right now, so I won't develop this case, but just to know, and if you are interested in this, we have a recent article as well with Rafael Mesquita on middle powers and the evolution of the outer space regime. It's mainly an analysis of how this specific international regime has evolved across time. So it could be interesting if you are interested in outer space. And there is a database to come, like the one I produced for the pandemic agreement and the BBAJ agreement on space security negotiation that I've been doing with Petra Godoy, who is as well in Pernambuco, a PhD student right now. So we are going to make it public quite soon, this database, in order to share the data. So in terms of conclusion, these cases and this work lead me to three specific conclusions. First of all, even within the ongoing recomposition of the international order, geopolitics does not eclipse the importance of international norm creation, which constitutes to define appropriate behavior in world politics, securing access to resources, promoting distributive justice, and safeguarding the sustainability of life. This is important to recall because we are invited in the media, in the daily life, by the discourse of force, the discourse of material power, the idea that only the most powerful are those who conduct international relations. This is wrong. This is wrong, and this is even more wrong and we know even more and better that when we focus on norms that are highly constitutive of the world ordering. Second grand conclusion. Within this recomposed order, Latin American states are neither passive nor merely instrumentalized. They assume a protagonistic role alongside other states of the Global South, of course. Third conclusion, the case I've been presenting are not isolated. Beyond the BBNG agreement on ocean, the pandemic agreement, space security, we could add many other multilateral negotiations in the different policy domain for each. If we refer only to ocean, we could observe, for instance, the WTO agreement on fisheries subsidies. We could explore the mining code in the International Seabed Authority, the plastic treaty, etc., etc., etc. There are many cases of multilateral negotiation where the influence of Latin American countries are to be explored and assessed. And one final, but equally, it was not on this one, I guess, no. One final, but equally crucial conclusion that comes out from this research, if you can just try to...
Yeah, go back.
No, to go further. Well, no, it was not, but the final point, before the thank you. Crucial conclusion is that the capacity of Latin American states to be normative contributors and shapers of the world order is highly bound to democratic stability. And this is an important issue. And I just use one instance to illustrate this. In the case of the pandemic agreement, Argentina was initially very active diplomatically. But when President Milei entered in power, the country completely disappeared from the negotiation. And this had an important impact on how Latin American states could be protagonistic in terms, I was explaining this earlier, on intellectual property rights, or to help design an architecture that in the future is going to protect Latin American countries on this regard. So this shift that relates to democracy and the entering into power of illiberal, populist political leaders have obviously an impact on democracy, but in the long term, it has impact on the capacity of the whole region to be influential in order to shape the world order. So this is, I think, not a minor conclusion of this, and we have to pay attention to this link between multilateral influence and democratic stability. So to conclude my presentation and with one final idea, the broader LATGlobe research projects seek obviously and above all to invite young students, researchers, to further research on this aspect, because as I've been saying, there are many material to create, data to collect in order to consolidate the findings I've been figuring out here. And so I wanted to share this invitation to invest on this kind of research, to stress that Latin America is not anymore and has never been irrelevant, and that it has played a great role in the shaping of the world order. Thank you very much.
I think you brought a lot of insights for us, for our research. And yeah, I would like to use the floor first, and then I can open for all of you. It's that fine?
Here we are.
Okay. So yeah, sorry, I'm going to use the floor first. Of course, everyone can afterwards raise questions too. But what struck me in your presentation, of course, in the research at all, that you brought this path dependence of Latin America as a traditional player, if you say like the countries as a coalition. And I think that it's important to bring some historical facts too regarding that, plus the importance of the delegations in the Bretton Woods conference, but also Berta Lutz she was really important for the Human Rights Charter, and also before we had this tradition in Brazil of our diplomats, Rui Barbosa in the Hague Conference, and all that history is quite important. But I was thinking about how are you bringing this historical experience to this trick case, and I think the trick cases are quite interesting because they regard questions which are quite organically cosmopolitan, because we were talking about ocean, health, and space. So it's quite different to establish the sovereign limits of these agendas. Yeah. And my question is, what about bringing, I'm not saying that you need to do that, but I think at certain point you are going to compare this, I'm sure, but bring more hard power subjects like the war in Ukraine or the war in the Middle East, because I guess the positions of these countries within the United Nations system are going to reveal a lot of tentatives too, which are silent by the media at all, but I'm sure that a lot of bridge diplomacy are being constructed by these countries as well. I'm not sure if you had this in mind the first time. This is one question that I would like to listen from you, and also like this. No, actually, I'm going to keep this because I'm sure that my colleagues is going to bring more questions. But we can collect all the contributions and then you react, or you prefer. Maybe
we can just go question by question. It could be easier. I'm going to trying to be short in order to let the floor to the others. Related to history, it's a very interesting comment because what you say is totally true. We have a very long historical experience, and Brazil maybe has the strongest diplomatic experience of influence within multilateral arenas. You referred to Rui Barbosa, the Eagle of the Hague. Actually, this is one of the most famous figure of diplomat that has been influential in multilateral arenas. And it's even more important that at that time, the international order, the emerging international order or society was even more asymmetrical, hierarchical. So it was kind of a very strong movement he made. So in this project, I have a specific chapter that comes back to this broader history, referring to trying to figure out the general influence of Latin American states within diplomacy, multilateral aspects. And this aspect on history helped a lot to also pick out the different policy domains, because I've been choosing 3 policy domains in which we can track historical influence by Latin American states. For ocean, the influence on the law of the sea is obvious. On space, it is not well known, but Latin American states, it's what we have demonstrated in the article with Rafael, in this construction of the international regime. Latin American states have been very influential as well. And in health, again, the negotiation of the Tobacco Convention, for instance, the antiretroviral medicines, but even on tropical diseases, medicine that have been developed since late 18th century has known an influence from Latin American states. So history enters in the selection also of the cases because of this path-dependent influence. sectors that are related to sovereignty. Good point. Actually, the case that tries to reflect on this is the outer space one. Because in the outer space security case studies, precisely the idea is to bring back power capabilities. Because we have a clear-cut scenario, China, Russia, US, that are fighting together to militarize outer space. But while I'm saying this, they are trying to do so on an unofficial manner, because outer space remains a peaceful domain, but with dual technology, they are making of outer space kind of war domain. So this brings to hard power, this brings to confrontation of capabilities, and this refers to sovereign issues. So in the broader panorama and the equilibrium between more cosmopolitan policy domain and more sovereignty-based and oriented case study, outer space is the one that enters this reflection.
Thank you. Now we're going to open the floor. I think first Ana Paula, then Rubens, and
Go ahead.
yeah, please.
I'm still thinking about but I work with EU, and as a Brazilian, I have been asked for my academic life about the LA and EU relations, and I had to go through this issue. And first, until a few years ago, I was very critical for the idea of thinking about LA and the Caribbean countries as a region that can be seen as a homogeneous block with a common view of international politics. And I have said a lot about this only in informal situation and classes until I was invited for write after saying this in a conference, international conference. I was invited to write a chapter for a book that I'm finishing now. So thanks for your presentation about the LA view of global IR. And I said, I'm not the person to say, to write about that, because I'm critical about that.
Yeah.
And I said, no, but we have heard
Precisely.
you talking about that. And we have to, so I had to go deeper in my arguments. And at the end, I'm very happy with your presentation, because it's very, it was very helpful for my conclusions. Because at the end, so first I started to, how can I say, deconstruct, in order to go very back to the end of the decolonization process, the process of independence, in order to pick up strongly the principles, the common values and that are related with sovereignty, and the understanding that being exactly a norm maker is more important, and this is what former colonized countries see their places in the world. So saying that, it's very interesting, because I could say, no, those are just 3 cases, but those are not just 3 cases, because we can go through several other situations in the history in where they look for institutionalized and formalizing process of relations, and also transforming coalitions in and bilateral. So I'm very happy to hear you, because my research has gone through the same path.
Kind of confirmation.
Yeah.
And it's
But-
a keynote. When
Yes. But at the same time, I would like to ask you about, for example, how much when you go, okay, so we understand that Latin America can play an important role in international politics as a norm making, but also this is we don't need to defend that so important because we have seen EU and EU
Yeah.
is a norm maker and has influencing international politics exactly as the same. So my question is how much having Latin American countries and the EU and European countries occupying this place in international politics as two blocks of countries, having the same kind of process dynamics to influence for different reasons,
Totally.
for
Yeah.
totally different reasons, totally different strategies and
Yeah.
processes. How much it can be seen as, kind of more strong coalition
Yeah,
in terms of the contemporary geopolitics. And so that's my question. Sorry,
Thank you.
it was a long question.
No, but very interesting. You I just pick up this element because I found it interesting. You just started referring to this dimension of homogeneity of the region. I didn't talk about this, but it's still very important because I want to precise that most of the time I use the term Latin America is influential as such. You mentioned the Caribbean, but of course we have high singularities. What I found in most of my cases are cases of influence by what we have called with Raphael middle powers: Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Chile, in somehow, but not that much. Actually, we have some instances of influence in very specific topics, for instance, by El Salvador, Costa Rica, but it's more ad hoc. So this question of homogeneity is important to recall, as well as not making of Latin America as a whole general influence. You're totally right regarding this idea of being a norm maker is somehow more important than having hard capabilities. The EU have tried to invest on this, Latin America as well, as we said, for totally different reasons. But one of them bind them together is autonomy. So, and this relates directly to our project Capes-Cofecubi, autonomy as a way to, and norm making as a way to build autonomy in a highly reshaped international order. Related to EU-LAC relation, what I found interesting is to assess the paradox of, despite being norm contributors, most of the time they are kind of divergent in multilateral arenas. And a few months ago, I've been presenting a bit of this presentation in the European Commission, at the European Commission, and I kind of make their ideas explode because they were concretely thinking that they were close to Latin American countries. Yeah, well, they are friends, we are allies, natural partners, common values, etc., etc. And I've been saying, okay, but this is, just words. Because when you try to figure out concretely in a negotiation how and where you locate what position, and is this position close to the one of Latin American states? Not at all. You're very divergent. Even you defend opposite, very antagonistic positions. So at the rhetorical level, you say that you're partners, But when you are negotiating concretely international legally binding treaties, you are at the opposite. And they were kind of embarrassed because I brought data to illustrate this. You know, look, I presented above all pandemic negotiations. Look, these are the position of Latin American states. These are yours. So this is why and how I think investing more on how these normative powers, as we have been calling the EU for many years, but now Latin American states also has normative power. The idea of bringing them together would be a counterweight, very important in the contemporary world order, to face this not only idea but behavior of great powers. But it's mostly the European Union that is vacillating and that does not really know what kind of stand to have in the contemporary world order. Because it's difficult to build common position as well today in the European Union, politically.
Thank you. Can you keep Milan in the first place?
Milan wants to talk?
No, he wrote his question and
then I'm going to ask mine.
Maybe he needs to go out because of his mother. Yeah, he's on the hospital. Yeah. So let's read his question because it's a specific condition, and then after we go back. Yeah. Sorry, Rubens.
Let's see. Great expose, Kevin. Thank you. I share many of your assumptions and agree to many of your conclusions. However, the debate. It seems that your emphasis on norms and not on geopolitical and democratic backlash tends to downplay the role of central-periphery relations first, and the role of national political economies second. You're right. Why do you tell about norms, immaterial power, and material dimension of power? This is perhaps our complementarity. I think it's true. It's fair. It's a fair remark. Actually, what can I answer to this? I think I'm not directly downplaying this idea of center-periphery relations in terms of trying to figuring out how the mainstream narrative or the standard narrative have, however, still an influence in the relationship between different coalitions. So, for instance, I talked about related to the pandemic agreement, to this opposition between what we supposedly call global north to global south. I mean, this, in my study, this relation, the role of center-periphery relations enter into this rhetorical dimension as a standard narrative that can have an influence in the building of this relationship, in terms of practice, how this can design hierarchical relation within the multilateral. The multilateral negotiation. So maybe it enters not necessarily through the back door, but in a circumvented way. But I think it's present in my presentation. But in a way, it is not central in the perspective that I try to deconstruct this approach. So necessarily, it's not that present as well. And role of national political economies. This is true, but I think it's justified by my epistemological position at the very beginning of this research project, trying to give more importance to norm construction and norm making. Of course, I'm not saying that capabilities does not play any function in this way of articulating ideas in multilateral spheres. Of course, it has an importance. Of course, I was mentioning this idea of the number of delegates you have in a negotiation that can have an impact in terms of bringing expertise. This is undeniable. When you have the US that enter into the room with 15 delegates, and that you have Colombia that have 2 delegates, it's of course, it has a lot of importance in terms of expertise you can bring to it. But what I am assessing is that despite of this very asymmetry based on national capabilities, or that relates to national capabilities, this does not undermine the capacity of being influential in terms of norm creation. And this is why it's not that central in this analysis. But I guess I can be criticized on my epistemological position in any way. So these are fair remarks.
Right, so I have plenty comments and questions because your presentation talked to me very deeply because I use non-theoretical analytical theory because on my PhD. So when I was doing PhD, it was really difficult for me to use this literature because it was totally overlooking the agency of the southern countries, and I was comparing Brazil to the United Kingdom. So it was really difficult for me. So thank you for working on that and advancing that. But yeah, there's plenty of things that I would like to comment. And I'll start with the last one because I think it's very close to what Melanie said. I wouldn't frame as central periphery difference. I do agree that the domestic context will have an impact on how states will behave internationally, but I think that when you're looking at democracy on Latin America, it's not the system itself, but when there is a shift in domestic authoritarianism, it tends to be linked to the United States because the United States tend to promote those kind of governments here. So it's not about how democracy has an influence on the normative stance of the but how they become more aligned to the United States. And of course, we have authoritarian regimes that are not linked to the United States, for instance, Venezuela and Cuba. However, the United States make a huge effort to look at them and turn them pariah internationally.
That's
so
true.
that will jeopardize, undermine the capacity to become the normative actors internationally. So I think that what you found, it's very interesting, but I would approach in a different way.
Yeah.
And Melanie gave another kind of approach for central periphery, which is slightly different from mine, but I do agree with him. And now let's go to plenty of questions. So I love that you don't place Latin America in a passive role in normative circulation. However, it seems to me that it keeps a reactive role. So it waits for the new norms or negotiation being established by the North, and then Latin American countries try to contribute to context, to add something, and to shape what is already there. But there is little space for conception of new norms. And of course, Latin American countries, they have plenty of norms that they want to export and they want to establish. So my first question for you, do you see any kind of attempt to set the agenda for a normative way? For instance, I know that Brazil tried to be very proactive in responsibility while protecting, and I think that Chair has some papers on that. No conditionality when it comes to international cooperation. Both were mildly successful, but it didn't become the mainstream norm internationally. So do you see an attempt to set the agenda, or instead of setting the agenda, would you say that less powerful countries, for instance Latin American countries, they're promoting principles and norms across agendas. For instance, equity and social justice everywhere.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the regime of climate change, when it comes to regime of health, when it comes to regime of trade, the principle and the norm of equity comes over and over again for certain countries. That will be a different stance, normative stance. And one more question. This one is very specific. When you show the table, the distribution table / chart of distribution of actions by country, for me it was really clear that there is a divide, a difference between the behavior of southern countries and northern countries when it comes to reserve and retain. Have you seen something like that, and have you perceived, and what do you think about that? Sorry about the next question.
We need 2 hours now, more.
Well, we have a time.
No, yeah, we can use our time. Yeah.
Okay.
Please,
No,
take your time.
try to be quick. But thank you very much for this question. Actually very interesting. I'm very agree with what you said. It's very interesting to also have a different kind of gaze on how states are related to the UN rhetorical perspectives. In terms, what you say about it's interesting to observe the democratic evolution that have an impact on multilateral and UN stuff, but in the reverse, it's interesting to see how UN behave related to this shift in different perspectives, making them pariah or trying to help them as much as possible in order to retain a democratical consolidation. This is an interesting point. But I think what we've been observing right now is mostly countries whose political project in terms of not necessarily authoritarianism, but mainly illiberalism, is to have a negative relation to every kind of cooperation. So the very starting position is trying to demise the any multilateral capacity. That's why we're seeing a Trump, a Milei, a Bukele that does not even invest at all on multilateralism. So just withdrawing from it, and adding to that, criticizing or trying to make things explode. So I share your point. It's not only domestic impact, but I think still domestic impact in that regard has a very important weight because of a very specific political trend we are observing right now. It could be illiberal project, it could be conservative project or authoritarian project that still could be active in the multilateral arenas. Historically, we have been seeing this. It's kind of paradoxical to see many Latin American countries being influential at the UN during period of authoritarianism or dictatorship. So at that time, authoritarianism or dictatorship did not impede from being influenced at the UN level. Today, it's kind of radically different shape and dynamic. Those illiberal power want to withdraw from the UN.
Okay.
If I understood correctly the answer, that's why I would insist on the domestic impact of it.
No, I agree with the domestic impact. I'm questioning whether it's a matter of the system of government. So democratic / authoritarian. But well, I see that because the new illiberal wave, they tend to be against the multilateralism. So I think you have a fair point there.
But it's maybe a start for further reflection as well. But
by the end, we agree.
Interesting point. But I think we agree on this basis. But I think it deserves a further reflection. Second point: not passive but reactive. Excellent question again. Actually, we have a piece, a forthcoming piece with Raphael, again, on this precise idea that's not necessarily related to the cases I've been presenting, but with a more historical trajectory. What we are assessing is that precisely Latin American countries have specialized on this very idea of preventing what could happen. Let's say not reactive, but trying to be preventively protected in the face of technological breakthrough, for instance. In this article, I can share it. It's not still published. It's going to be published, I hope so, in the review of international organizations. But I can share the draft. We're exploring 3 cases: the outer space again, deep seabed, and marine biodiversity. And not the present time, but historically how these regimes have been built. And what we observe is that despite not facing concrete exploration or depredation of resources, of a capture of resources, Latin American states have been intensively trying to prevent from those potential dynamics. So at the time where no technological capability enabled to explore the deep seabed, in the 70s, Latin American states were still already trying to build norms and rules that could protect them when the time would come. Mm-hmm. So they have been preventively building norms and rules that could protect them. And this is very present for deep seabed, outer space, and marine biodiversity. Okay. Nuclear politics as well. Nuclear politics is nuclear order, more broadly, is a fascinating case that confirms this perspective. And we have been trying this title, Building from Mirages. So the way you see the future, the way you anticipate the future, condition the way you try to build norms as well. So not that reactive, but anticipation. Mm-hmm. So the historical demonstration we made would answer your question as not all the time reactive, but preventive. From the cases I've been presenting, yes, it's reactive. Because at least for the pandemic and for outer space. The agenda for marine biodiversity goes back to 30 years ago, so it's more complex. But in terms of pandemic and outer space, I think you're right, more reactive. And I like the idea, the way you present this idea of kind of meta-norms that could be transversal to different policy domains, fostering on transversal principles like equity. This is an interesting way to figuring out. And retain or reserve. Actually, I have no precise answer on this because it depends a lot on what topic are you discussing about. It has different meaning depending on the country and depending on whether you are negotiating on technology transfer or on benefit sharing or on pathogen access. So this retain or reserve strategy shift from developed to developing countries depending on the topic. Okay. So, but obviously it's an interesting point because it's fully part of the strategy. But there's no stable meaning. Okay. It depends a lot.
Thank you. Now following the line, Arthur, then after Hugo, is there someone else? Juliana also? Okay, please.
So firstly, thank you for your presentation. Having was amazing. Like many thoughts, but like concentration on 2 quick questions. So first, for what I understood, like the selected cases that you utilize, like they are cases where Latin America like did play a role in the constitution, in the constitution of these norms. Like, but would it be interesting for you, like, to select a case, like it connects to Ruben's question, to select a case in which it didn't happen? in which they tried to influence the norm, but it didn't happen. I think maybe it would strengthen the argument, I don't know. And let's see. And beyond the scope of the research that you said, but thinking about the questions that you put at first about does this marginalization of the 20th century like persist in the 21st century? Like, I think it's important also not to just to see the global north perspectives on our marginalization, but to see the roles of the national elites too.
Yeah.
Like, do these elites project in the different national contexts? Do they project Latin America as proactive, as a rule maker? It would be interesting maybe to investigate this different perspectives. I don't know, just random thought.
You said for the last one, you say how elite project Latin American interest in the
because like because in many cases, like we see this in Africa and in many cases in Latin America, like the elites benefit sometimes in being in a subordinate roles to these countries. For example, like it's not interesting for like our national elites to economic elites that are linked to agribusiness to promote a national development model like that is based on industry. For example, so like, and this reinforces our role as a subordinate member in the international community. So in this sense,
that's true. Interesting point. Okay. I'm not sure we
Very
have...
nice morning for you, right?
It's the kind of thing we are looking for, right? Because I have still some months to finish the book, so all the remarks are helping me to make some shades. So that's great. Thank you so much. Cases where Latin American didn't play a role. That's a tricky question because I was trying to think about this and which one.
Because it can be control case, for example.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah,
methodologically, I fully agree with you. But which one? I return the question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's such a strategic. Playing a match, the tennis match. No, actually, I'm seriously thinking about this, and well, you have a lot of methodological entry points. So. At the level of policy domain or specific negotiation, of course, when you are referring to specific, very highly specific negotiation, I'm sure you can find some negotiation in which, well, Latin American countries didn't play that much a role. But most of the time, you can refer these very specific single cases to broader sectoral policy domain or policy sector or international regime perspective, and in these lenses, it's kind of difficult to isolate one policy domain in which Latin American country would have not played any kind of role.
We have an example from the Milani.
GATT, international trade until China's emergent entry, and actually I would disagree with this because precisely. Still, but before being agent Brazil in the early negotiation in WTO, they were already still very active in GATT, and if we extend the historical trajectory, it's even more the case in WTO. Brazil has been very active since the early millennium in the creation of many norms, making resistance to the US agenda on agriculture, for instance. There is a super article published recently by Stéphanie Ricard in the review of international organizations on the agreement of fisheries subsidies negotiated in WTO as well. And again, we see Latin American countries as a first and most influential coalition. So the thing I want to say is that from WHO to WTO to WIPO for international protection to General Assembly to UNEP, we found all the time we found instances of influence. So I will keep this question and I will try to find something. And I'll try to answer your question in Paris.
Perfect. Love that.
Because I need some more investigation on this.
Well, Melanie added,
By the key
the
decision.
decision were taken by the Quad, which I agree. And if we go to the international security regime, Security Council, I think we
that's
might
kind
find,
of No, but that's totally true. But the Security Council is kind of very specific, institutionalized space, in which the starting point is asymmetry. First of all, so obviously the only finding you can draw from this is asymmetry in terms of relationship of and power relation.
and also IMF and
There is also IMF and World
Depends on the
Bank.
subject. When you have power structures working well.
Well, let's plan a new research project inserting IMF and World Bank in the. Okay, Carlos. We'll discuss about this later.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And regarding
The
elites,
second
Oh,
part.
sorry.
um,
You need to leave with just one question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
sorry, I did force.
no, elite. Sincerely, I need to think also more about this because, from what I understand from this question, as how elites project Latin American interest in multilateral space may refer to very distinct interpretation and understanding of on the consequences, on impact, on process. So either I ask you to precise a bit more, or either we can discuss more broadly about this later. So you decide.
So I will not take the floor.
We can discuss it, more profoundly.
So I would love to hear your answer, but don't want to take the time.
Because at a very sociological level of analysis, the answer could be at 24-hour classes because we have all this trajectory, cultural, political material. So yeah,
Okay,
I prefer to leave it out and we discuss about this later.
Hugo.
Thank you for such a fruitful presentation and debate. I have two quick questions. The first one is related to the idea of relevance or irrelevance, that you mentioned that Latin America can be considered relevant in the Chilean argument. And my first question is related to what Professor Ana Paula asked you, because when we see the example, Latin America is not negotiating as a group.
Yeah.
So maybe my question would be, is Latin America relevant, or Latin American regional powers relevant in the negotiations?
Yeah, that's
And my
Nice
second
question.
question is related to how to measure relevance. Because being part, it's really important, for sure. If you're not sitting on the table on a dinner, probably you are in the menu. But at the same time, and you give a hint about that on the negotiation on pandemics, do you try to measure the success of these propositions in the negotiation? Because I can add, during the negotiation, offer a lot of additions,
that's true.
changes, but most of them cannot have any success in the outcome of the negotiation. So how can we measure the success in the outcome of the negotiation?
Two excellent questions, and I'm sorry not to enter too much into details, but it's fully part of assessing the impact and relevance. And I'm starting with this.
There is no Latin American coalition. So, and the other case that you argue that is kind of a Latin American coalition. And I was wondering if you can see these actors that play a major in the pandemic case in Latin American coalitions, or we can see all the actors that don't show them as much when we treat about Latin American coalitions.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I want to ask if we can see the difference.
Yeah.
When we have Latin American coalition, we
Yeah.
can see actors that doesn't show
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
When we don't have Latin American coalition,
Yeah.
it's kind of the difference.
Difference when we have and when we have not.
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting question. When and okay. Okay. Regarding so assessing relevance, what I do in this project is to track down the influence, comparing all the process and the final text. So to track the contribution of Latin American states and what is in the document at the very end of the negotiation. So what from the final outcome comes from Latin American contributions. So there is a specific, I'm trying to assess this qualitatively. Stéphanie Ricard, the article I was mentioning, tried to assess this quantitatively. For instance, for the agreement on fisheries, she demonstrated that about 8% of the final outcome, the final agreement, comes directly from contribution from Latin American states. The Latin American coalition that was formed during the negotiation. And 8%, it's a lot, actually, it's a lot. So I'm assessing this qualitatively in terms of what kind of principle you find at the end of the negotiation that was part of a strategy by Latin American countries to fight. Related to Latin America or regional power influence, it's an interesting question because, as I said to Ana Paula, the idea is kind of complicated to say all the time that it is a Latin American position. Of course, it's not. But what is interesting in the main finding I have is that the influence of Latin America is increasing when precisely they present them as a bloc. The degree of influence is greater when they have, and I answer also this question, when they have this capacity of forging coalition, Latin American coalition. They are stronger. Well, it's not a new finding. This was true during the League of Nations time. So the volumetric aspect of influence. But of course, once this being said, I have a lot of instances on more specific issues when you can't talk about Latin American position, but Brazilian ones that tries to have some followers, not all the region, but for instance, Brazil, Mexico. I'm thinking to one article specifically, but Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Guatemala, Paraguay. Which one? And another one. But it was a kind of group, a small group of 6-7 states that were trying to push things further. The leader was Brazil, but he was supported by this small coalition of not Latin American states, but or continental perspective, but through the support of states. So actually, to answer concretely the question, I have the two dimensions: positions that are continental or subcontinental, and regional powers that have influence. It occurs in both ways. And precisely to answer your question, so when you have coalition, from the empirical observation, is that you have greater chance to be influenced when you present yourself as a coalition, as a group. But this is true for the African group, this is true for ASEAN, this is true for WEOG, when you're thinking to developed states as well. It occurs the same, but rather than when you have no coalition. And for instance, in BBNJ, we had some coalition, and they have been very influential. In the pandemic agreement, no coalition, but a wide spectrum of alternative strategy that have been compensating this lack of coalition. So it's an equilibrium at the end.
thank you so much. Just in time, do you like? Yes, please.
No, I just want one word.
Not
Sorry
in
for
time
that,
anymore.
sorry for that. You don't have you here.
No, we still have 2 minutes. So
Oh,
Yeah,
so,
because I don't want you to collapse here.
no, that's fine. That's fine. I had some
no,
coffee.
But I think it's okay if we go
Yeah.
5 minutes more, 10
Yeah.
minutes more.
Yeah,
half
like-
an
I don't care.
half an hour.
I'm okay. So don't worry for me.
Okay.
no, just my final conclusion about my critical position regarding the region is exactly that we can consider bilateral. How can I say? More. A few countries playing a more
major role,
important, more important role in international politics. But still, when Latin American countries, even in bilateral positions, can influence, be present, having a diplomatic strategy that can be, interesting for the region. I don't know how to qualify that, but when we see the presence of Latin American countries, not just a bloc, but when we see the presence of Latin American countries, my view is that still I can consider Latin American countries because they can influence in world politics, carrying the same baggage of autonomy, sovereignty, non-intervention, so the respect and the respect international law and constructing international law. So I think, of course, we will see a few countries. We are not countries from the south, so few countries playing a more important role. But what I see in common is that I don't see that it's a bloc all the time, but these countries can represent what in the bloc we see as common legacies and values. That's my view. Just for complementing what I think I did not say exactly what I think. So I'm critical about the region as a role, but I have to put and explain that okay, we are not acting as a region, but what are the strategies? What are the values? So those are common. So
That's true.
That's my view.
What is it very? Sorry.
It's interesting because to be a bloc, actually you need to have leaders.
Yeah.
And at least if you have regional powers working together, you can think positively that you are moving toward the capacity of having a regional bloc. Not in all the issues, but in some issues you can work on that. But have the regional powers as working together, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
If you want to complicate, we would say we, Brazilians, only 4% of Brazilians feel like we are Latin Americans.
Yeah, that's why it was kind of interesting for me to present this, because all the time when I present, it was the same in Recife, in Pernambuco, I kind of expected some comments of, okay, you are talking about Brazil, but it's part of Latin America.
That's another problem.
Yeah. But what you say is...
Short 4%?
4%.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. It's very interesting to think through this, through the idea of regional powers articulating in different shapes, because from this project I have a broader one, not specifically focusing on Latin America, but just have this focus on norms and trying to figure out for different regions. And what we see is precisely this articulation between different great powers that reshape consistently the coalition on different topics to assess different norms. So the coalition, no coalition is stable across time, but we always see some push or impulse from global south countries or regional powers from the south in order to promote some specific norms that could defy or challenge northern position. This is kind of a stable pattern. But coalitions as such, they are moving constantly, even for Latin America and also for other regions.
And this research about us belonging to Latin America, I think you need to update this research after Bad Bunny's phenomenon.
Brazilians feel like them. We are Brazilians.
Yeah.
We are Latin America. So.
Well, Milan's already making jokes of exploring.
Okay, guys, I think it was a really intense. Bye-bye, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos.
For being
See you soon.
us.
See you soon in Paris.
Take care. Send our love to your mother, and this is what you had for this morning. I thank you so much because this was quite important for us as
Thanks
a group.
to you.
And of course, Kevin is open for further contacts, and we keep collaborating and cooperating with him and with this project. And we can go after for lunch here around. I don't know what you have in your.
I'm free.
And yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks for the questions.